In 1878, a Barry County deputy rode into a hollow in the southwest Missouri Ozarks to serve a warrant on a family named Grimm. He never rode back out. 3 weeks later, the county sent 9 men in after him, and what those 9 men found was written into a report that no longer exists. The Grimms had been living in that hollow for at least 60 years. Nobody could say who sold them the land. Nobody could say where they came from. However, every survey, map drawn of that valley before 1840 shows something already standing in it. Cut stone, squared, coursed, fitted without mortar, and not one person in the state of Missouri has ever claimed to have built it. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the Grimm family record that Barry County struck out of its own books, the 14 names ruled through in the 1850 enumeration, the 1,819 surveyors' field notes describing the stonework at the head of the hollow, the county clerk's written order to destroy the file, signed and dated. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. Hangman's Hollow is a narrow limestone cut about 9 miles from the Arkansas line. Steep walls, a spring-fed creek that runs cold in August, and a floor of soft grey silt that has no business being there. Karst country like this should be broken rock and clay. Instead, the floor of that valley is layered sediment, 6 to 8 feet of it, sitting on top of the bedrock like someone poured it in. Here is the part that stops people. The name Hangman's Hollow appears on a General Land Office survey plat drawn in 1819. The first recorded hanging in that valley happened in 1878, 59 years apart. So the valley was named for something that had not happened yet. Or it was named for something that happened long enough before 1819 that the settlers who arrived after it already knew what to call the place, and nobody wrote down why. The 1,819 survey was run by a federal deputy surveyor working his way up from the Arkansas border. His job was boundaries, section corners, timber notes, boring work. But in the margin of his field book, at the head of the hollow, he wrote a line that had nothing to do with boundaries. He recorded stoneworks, not a mound, not a cairn. Stoneworks, in the plural, described as dressed and laid in courses. The official explanation, when anyone bothers to give one, is Mississippian mound building. The people who raised Cahokia, and that would be a clean answer if the stone at Hangman's Hollow was stacked field rock. It isn't. It's cut. The faces are flat. The joints close tight enough that a knife blade won't go in. That is quarry work, and quarry work means tools, and tools mean a workforce, and a workforce in a valley 9 miles from Arkansas in the years before 1819 means somebody was living there in numbers nobody has ever accounted for. And then there's the depth. Whatever those stoneworks were, by 1901 they were sitting under 6 feet of that grey silt. The Grimms show up in the written record in 1840 as a household of 19 people, in a territorial tally that lists no head of family and no origin. There is no ship manifest, no land patent, no entry in the Federal Land Office books showing that anyone named Grimm ever bought an acre in Barry County. They were simply counted, the way you count a stand of timber that was there before you arrived. Neighbours, when they talked at all, said the Grimms spoke English with an accent nobody could place. Not German, though the name suggests it, not Scots-Irish, which is what half the Ozarks sounded like. Something flatter, older, with the vowels in the wrong places. They bought almost nothing. They sold almost nothing. But they always had coin, and the coin they paid with was silver, and more than one storekeeper in Cassville noted that the pieces were worn past reading. The 1,850 federal census was the first one that recorded every person in a household by name, age, sex, place of birth, all of it. It is the single best window into who was actually living in rural America before the Civil War. For Hangman's Hollow, that window is ruled out. 14 names on that sheet are struck through with one clean line, drawn with a straight edge, not scribbled, not blotted, ruled. And the enumerator wrote a single word in the margin beside them that later clerks transcribed, with obvious hesitation, as removed. Removed is not a census term. Deceased is a census term. Duplicate is a census term. Removed is what you write about property. The ages of those 14 ruled-out names, where they're still legible, run from 4 to 61. Every hollow in the Ozarks has stories. Most of them are the same story wearing different hats. The Grimm stories are not. Farmers 3 ridges over kept written accounts of livestock losses, and the pattern in those accounts is strange. Animals were not taken. They were found, in the morning, standing in a line facing the hollow, not spooked, not injured, facing. There's a second pattern in those same farm books, and it runs on a calendar. The losses cluster in late October and early November, every year, for at least 2 decades. One family in the Roaring River bottoms simply stopped writing the dates down after 1871 and switched to a mark. A small cross in the margin, 11 of them across 4 autumns, with no explanation attached to any of them. The road that ran past the mouth of the valley was rerouted in 1866 at county expense, for no engineering reason anyone recorded. The new route added 1.5 miles. Somebody paid real money to make sure the road did not go past that opening after dark. And there were the children. Between 1852 and 1874, at least 9 children were placed with families in Barry and Stone counties who were described in local church records only as Grimm children. No birth records, no parents named. No baptisms. They came out of the hollow. They did not go back in. Deputy Hollis Vane was 34 years old, 6 years in the job, and by every account a careful man. The warrant he carried into Hangman's Hollow in the spring of 1878 was for an assault that had happened outside a mill in Cassville. He went in on a Tuesday. His horse came back on Thursday, saddled, unhurt, with the reins tied off neatly to the horn. The county waited 3 weeks. 3 weeks for a deputy. That delay is the loudest fact in this entire story, because it means somebody in that courthouse already understood what going into that valley meant. When they finally went in, they went in with 9 men and a wagon. What they found was the tree, a white oak at the head of the hollow, standing more or less where the surveyor had marked the stoneworks 59 years earlier, and hanging from it were 11 ropes. Only 2 of them were empty. Here is the detail that the surviving fragments of the account keep circling back to, the one that broke the men who saw it. The 9 bodies on that tree were not Grimm's. They were identified, and every single one of them was a person who had been reported missing from 3 separate counties over the previous 11 years. People whose families had been told to give up hope. People who, by any reasonable accounting, should have been dead for a decade. They were not decayed the way 10 years demands. 2 of the 9 were identified by family members who travelled from Stone County to do it, and both of those identifications were made on the same afternoon in a barn because the county would not bring the bodies into town. One of the men who made an identification left Missouri within the month and never returned. His descendants still have the letter he wrote from Kansas, and the letter says almost nothing about what he saw. It spends 4 pages on the ropes instead, on how they were tied, on the fact that the knots were not knots he recognized, and that he had been a riverman for 9 years. Deputy Vane was not among them. Deputy Vane has never been found. Before we move on to what happened to the courthouse, stop for a second. What you just heard about the 11 ropes is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original county docket. The 9 identifications, the 11-year window. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back. Because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. In February of 1879, less than a year after the 9 men came out of Hangman's Hollow, the Barry County Courthouse burned. Courthouse fires are not rare in 19th century America. Wood buildings, coal stoves, kerosene lamps. Historians have a phrase for the way American county records vanish, and they use it with a shrug. But this fire has a problem, and the problem is that it was selective. Deeds survived. Tax rolls survived. Marriage books survived. The probate files survived, which matters, because probate files are paper, stacked, in the same room. What did not survive was the criminal docket for 1878, the coroner's inquest book, and the sheriff's correspondence file. 3 specific record sets, all of them touching one event. And there is a document held in a private collection and photographed in the 1970s. That is a clerk's written instruction dated 11 days before the fire, directing that certain files be pulled and boxed for transfer. It names the files. It is signed. It has a date. Nobody has ever explained where the box went. Between 1,854 and 1,929, something in the neighborhood of 200,000 American children were loaded onto trains in eastern cities and distributed to households across the interior. The orphan trains. It is real, it is documented, and it is one of the strangest mass movements of human beings in American history. The paperwork for those children is usually thin, but it exists, and it has columns: name, age, place of origin, receiving family. Between 1,881 and 1,894, a cluster of children were entered into that system out of southwest Missouri, with the origin column left blank. Not unknown, not illegible, blank. Somebody sat with a pen in their hand, came to that column, and made a decision not to write. Their surnames had been changed before entry. But the receiving records in 4 states carry the same annotation in the margin, in 4 different hands, and the annotation is a single letter, G. Those children were placed as far away as Oregon and Vermont. They were spread out. That is not how you handle orphans. That is how you handle a bloodline you are trying to break. The state of Missouri sent a geologist into Hangman's Hollow in the spring of 1901 as part of a broader survey of lead and zinc prospects in the southwest counties. He was not looking for ruins. He found them anyway. His report describes worked stone at the head of the valley, partially exposed by creek cutting, buried under approximately 6 feet of fine grey sediment. He noted, in language that reads like a man choosing his words carefully, that the sediment was uniform, unstratified, and inconsistent with gradual deposition. Unstratified matters. Silt that settles over centuries lays down invisible layers, like tree rings. Layers mean time. No layers means it arrived all at once. Something buried that valley in a single event, fast enough that the water never got a chance to sort itself. And whatever was standing in there when it happened is still down there, under 6 feet of it, and still no one has dug. He also noted, almost in passing, that the sediment contained no organic material, no leaf mold, no root traces, no bone, nothing that lives in a river valley. Whatever moved that much earth into that hollow did not scrape it off the surrounding hillsides. It came out of somewhere that had nothing alive in it at all. The geologist recommended further study. The recommendation was not funded. His report was filed, and the filing reference in the state index points to a folder that is empty. The last person recorded under the Grimm name in Barry County appears in 1907 in a single line of a tax assessment, with no first name given and no valuation entered. That same year the land at the head of the hollow was conveyed to a lumber company. The deed is real. It is on file. It is signed by a grantor whose name appears in no census, no city directory, no death record, and no other deed in the state of Missouri. One signature, one appearance, gone. The lumber company cut nothing. It held the parcel for 31 years and never filed a timber sale. In 1938, the land passed into federal hands during a reservoir survey. It has been closed ever since. It is not a park. There is no trailhead, no interpretive sign, no permit process. It is fenced, it is posted, and the posting cites a statute that covers protected archaeological sites, which is an interesting thing to cite for a valley that officially contains nothing. Here is where this stops being one strange family in one strange valley. Run the same search in other counties. Look for a hollow or a bottom or a bend with a name that predates the event it's named for. Then look for cutstone in the survey notes, a household with no origin, and a courthouse fire within a decade. You get hits, not 1 or 2. You get a scatter of them running from the Ozark Plateau up through southern Illinois and into the Ohio Valley, and the same 3 ingredients show up together far more often than coincidence allows. Old stonework nobody claims, a family nobody can place, and a fire that takes exactly the records that would connect the two. That is not a folk legend spreading from town to town. Folk legends drift and mutate. This is a procedure being repeated. The Grimms of Hangman's Hollow are not the story. They are the one case where the paperwork was sloppy enough that we can still see the shape of it. A ruled line through 14 names. A clerk's order 11 days early. A blank column on a train manifest. A letter G in 4 different hands. Somebody went to a great deal of trouble to make that valley empty, and the fact that they had to try that hard tells you exactly how much was in it. So now you know what the surveyor wrote in 1819, what the enumerator crossed out in 1850, what the 9 men found on that tree in 1878, and what the geologist could not explain in 1901. The document below is the whole reconstruction, laid out in order, with the record references, so you can pull the ones that still exist and see for yourself. Subscribe now, because next week I'm going into the second hollow on that list, the one where the courthouse never burned,